So welcome everyone. Uh, Good evening, and I guess depending on what time zone you're in, maybe good morning. Welcome to the first full session of Mishnah in Depth, Masechet Ketubot. This course is a project of Drisha's Rivka Rosenwein Zichron Livracha Mishnah division and sponsored in memory of Rivka Rosenwein. As you come into the Zoom room, I will invite you to become a panelist. Don't worry, it doesn't mean we're going to be expecting you to speak on a panel or recite mishnayot. It just means that you can choose to turn on your camera if you wish, and when Rabbanit Sarna invites questions and comments, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask. I'll invite you as you come in, but also if you have already been invited but didn't understand, I will invite you all again after this. We just ask that when you're not speaking, you stay on mute so that it minimizes background noise and we can all hear each other. No matter how you're joining, your questions and comments are always welcome in the chat, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, then in the Facebook comments, and I'll bring them to the Zoom. So a little bit about this exciting new course. This course is designed to accompany independent daily study of the Mishnah, following the Mishnah Yomit cycle. We will meet weekly as a community of learners to augment our independent study, enhance our understanding of the mishnayot learned, and support each other as a community of learners in daily study of this foundational text. We will be learning with Rabbanit Leah Sarna, who is a member of the faculty and the director of teen programs at Drisha. She's previously served as Director of Religious Engagement at Anshe Shalom B'nai Yisrael congregation in Chicago, a leading urban Orthodox congregation. She was ordained at Yeshivat Maharat in 2018, holds a BA from Yale University in Philosophy and Psychology, and also trained at the SKA Beit Midrash for Women at Migdal Oz, Drisha, and the Center of Modern Torah Leadership. She has been awarded the Pomegranate Prize in Jewish Education by the Covenant Foundation and was a Wexner Graduate Fellow. Rabbanit Leah Sarna's published works have appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Leah House, and the Jewish Review of Books. I want to add that recently Rabbanit Sarna also won the Ateret Zvi Prize for her writing. And she has lectured in Orthodox synagogues and Jewish communal settings around the world and loves spreading her warm, energetic love for Torah and mitzvot with Jews in all stages of life. And with that, I will pass it over to Rabbanit Sarna.
Okay, hi everyone. So first of all, wonderful to see everyone. I'd be delighted to see people's faces, but I also know like people have lives going on and maybe you're eating dinner or wrestling kids into bed or whatever it is. So no pressure, but it's always wonderful. Hello, Debbie. Hello, Monique. I also want to say that I said this already last week, last Sunday, when we did a little bit of an introduction to Masechet Ketubot. But I'll just say it again, Ketubot is really hard. Every case in Yevamot is a tragedy, like in the sense that someone died. But Ketubot, there's a lot of women and asking questions about agency over women's bodies, and like traditional gender roles and all of that, which we'll get to later. There's a lot of tough stuff in Ketubot, as you already know, as you started learning it. And I just want to share like a little word of orientation around that, which is that at Drisha, we believe that we bring our full authentic selves to the Torah, and we encounter the Torah as authentically as we can reconstruct, which means two things in that relationship that I just described. One is when I read a text, it brings out emotions in me. Something that I learned in our little tiny amount of couples counseling that we did when I was at Maharat, which was this incredible line that if they're still fighting, then probably they might make it because they actually still care. And I always think about that with difficult Torah texts, that if you're willing to fight with it, if you're willing to be the Jacob in the relationship and wrestle with it, then you're in it, And so I want to, wish that everyone who's wrestling with these texts feels like that's our inheritance to wrestle with these texts. We wrestle with them all night long, and maybe in the morning we earn a new name for ourselves and we become Israel through success in that wrestling, or at least not giving up throughout the night and throughout the darkness. So that's my bracha with these texts. And at the same time, while we're wrestling, part of what we're looking for is a way to come to terms with it, is a way to be in relationship with these texts, is a way to find truth and meaning and value that resonates into our times from these ancient texts that have ancient expectations and understandings, but those are ancient texts and there are ancient understandings, and the oral Torah was given at Sinai and we and our souls were there, and it's lasted through time to resonate in different ways and be meaningful in different ways to us now. So I'll be trying to hold both of those things, the wrestling and the difficulty and the like critique, maybe you would say, and also the this is ours, this is mine, this is yours. I love it. I want to find meaning with it. That's what I'm wrestling for. And trying to do both of those things as honestly and wholeheartedly as we possibly can, I think is what Drisha, the institution, has really stood for a very long time. It's the type of Torah that we really stand for. And part of why I love working here and learning here and being part of this community. So I did just want to open with that. And then my second little piece is that, I mean, again, you guys all did this learning, but to me, it felt incredibly just resonant with with the experiences of, I can't read it outside of the outside of what's been happening or what happened in Israel on October 7th and the ongoing investigation of sexual abuse towards women that was part of that. And I just can't like take that out of, as just a Jewish woman in the world, like I can't take that, or a Jewish person in the world, really, I can't like take that out of my head at any point in time. So I just want to like kind of bring just a little kind of kavana from our parak into that, which is that, as probably you noticed, there's a repeating idea in our parak, which is this question of, well, there's 4 times, right? 4 mishnayot, a woman makes a claim, and then Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say, we believe her. And Rabbi Yeshua said, "Lo mipia anu chayim," like we don't live according to her mouth. We don't believe her. And the halacha in all 4 cases does not follow Rabbi Yehoshua. So this incredible, like dismissive, like, oh, just because she said it doesn't make it true idea that Rabbi Yehoshua here is representing gets rejected. And actually, she is believed, and we do take her claims about her own body and her own experiences seriously. And to me, in a parak full of complexity, that was a difficulty and wrestling. That was an idea that really resonated and that feels so important, is to see both of those voices that we're hearing now. Whoa, just because she said it doesn't make it true. And no, we do believe her. And then within that debate, that just is still ongoing, to hear our halacha say, no, there's only one answer here, and that is to say that she is believed. So all of that sort of by way of introduction. The other thing, just let me breathe on that for a second. Okay, the other thing I want to say is I'm going to share my screen so that people don't have to shuffle between sources and watching me and whatever. That makes following the chat a little bit difficult, but I want people to feel really comfortable to put any thoughts and ideas into there. And Lily Navs is going to mind the chat and she'll just interrupt me with people's questions. Or you can feel free to just unmute if you've elected to be a panelist. You can feel free to unmute and ask your own questions, and I will feel free to say, hold that thought 1 second. I'm just going to keep going here. And so don't worry about me not fending for myself. I'm good at that. Okay, so with that, if you got a chance to look at the Makrot in advance, you will have noticed that we're starting on a kind of untraditional note, but I think our parak is all about virginity, and I think we have to understand a few things about like what virginity is. So this is from an article actually written for teenagers, and I linked. I did not link to it. The link didn't come through. Oh no. Okay. Hold on, that's not good. I'll try and find the link and put it in the chat after, so that people can read the whole thing. But you can also look it up. It's on like a website called Scarlet Teen, and it's an interview with Hani Blank, who is a historian, writer. She's an expert on virginity. She wrote the first ever history of virginity called Virgin: The Untouched History, which is a book you can buy. And I just wanted to kind of use her orientation around virginity to help us break down certain assumptions that I think are not helpful for the understanding of our parak. So often we think about virginity as a physical thing. Like we associate virginity with a hymen that then, oh, she's not a virgin, the hymen is broken. Okay, so we'll come back to ways in which our parak complicates that idea. Anyways, but just to, okay, if we're going to talk about the hymen, we have to understand what it is first. So in this interview, she just brings a really clear explanation of where the hymen comes from. So basically, when a female fetus is developing in utero, I'm here, right? You can follow along with me. Her internal reproductive organs and her vagina develop separately from her external reproductive organs, labia, so forth. So what that means is like all the uterus, all of that stuff up to the vagina are developing totally separately from all the stuff that's on the outside. And then the vagina starts out as a solid cord that runs from the body wall to the uterus, but it's the solid cord that like is not open and there's no connection to the outside at that point. And then between the 5th and 7th months of gestation, the cord slowly hollows out and turns into a tube. A really great thing in the Gemara and Masechet Nida, when it's the famous Gemara about that like angel doing this, and then the angel teaching you all the Torah, and then on your way out it does this and you forget all the Torah. So in there's also a description of what happens at birth, and one of the things that happens at birth is like all the closed places open and all the open places closed, with this imagination of like, oh, you used to eat through the umbilical cord, and now like the mouth and the eyes and the nose and the everywhere and the genitals and everything else that's supposed to be open, ears, whatever, I guess those are all the holes, those all kind of open. And I think that, this is kind of describing that too. Like there's something that inside is closed for most of the time that it's developing, and then it only opens at the end. So between the 5th and 7th months of gestation, the cord slowly hollows out, turns into a tube, but it still doesn't have an opening to the outside of the body. It ends at the body wall. Finally, the body wall starts to disintegrate at the point where the vagina meets it, and an opening forms in the body wall and becomes the orifice, outlet, or opening of the vagina. So what the hymen is whatever remains of that body wall cling to the inside of the opening of the vagina after the opening forms. It's the leftovers of a sheet of flesh that used to separate the internal genitals from the external ones before the vagina had an opening. The openings in the center of the hymen are the entrance to the vagina. She has a whole thing also about how for some people, actually that entrance never forms. They often don't even find that out until they start to menstruate, at which point the blood can't leave the body, and that's very painful. And then they actually like have there's a few different words for it, but I think the word she prefers is like a hymenectomy, because the hymen is so extreme that things that need to leave the vagina can't, but it's like 2 seconds with like a knife or a laser. But that's like the extent to which the body wall actually can be this like very kind of strong divider there. But for most people, there's just a tiny amount of it left, and that's what's called the hymen. So she says this is also very rabbinic language, and she's Jewish, by the way, so it could be that this is even on purpose. I like to think of the hymen as a door frame mounted in a doorway that stands on the spot where external stops and internal starts. So if you were learning Masechet Ketubot, even the first part of Masechet Ketubot in the Gemara, you would have heard already of this claim of petach patuach matzati, like I found the doorway open, as a claim of as part of Tanat Betulim, which we're going to talk about in a second. And so she adopts that language. Like, what is the hymen? The hymen is the door frame. And if the door frame is open, then Petach Patuach Matzati, I found an open door. Anyways, okay. So you can't go in or out of that doorway without passing through the door frame. The hymen is exactly the same. It is part of the entrance to the vagina. Nothing can enter or exit the vagina without going through it. So do all women have hymens? Medical science thinks that pretty much everyone does. Researchers have estimated that about 0.03% of women are born without enough leftover tissue at the vaginal entrance that it is visible as a hymen, which would just mean that the process of the formation of the opening of the vagina was a bit more thorough than normal. Okay, but here's the thing. Does virginity equal the existence of a hymen, and who decides what virginity is? And here's where she gets the idea that virginity is a construct. And what that means is, like, when you think of the word virginity in your head, you probably have a construct that's informed by like America and English and like this idea that like whatever, all the ideas that came along with that. And I think in order to understand what's happening in our parak, you need to allow yourself to kind of rebuild a different idea potentially of virginity, or be open to at least debates about virginity that that might feel like more complicated maybe with our typical understanding of virginity. So for example, right, like in our parak, we see the horrible possibility of a girl who has been, we're going to call it raped, who is under 3 years old. And they would say, the Mishnah would say, well, she's still a virgin. And I think with our like maybe American understanding of virginity, we might not count that person, that victim, as a virgin. So just to point out, right, that virginity is a construct and that the rabbis are either they're inheriting a construct, but I think we're going to see that they're actually kind of debating at least the contours of their construct of virginity. So here's Blank's understanding of who decides what virginity is. She says the people who use the concept of virginity end up deciding how it should be defined, right? It's defined by the people who use it. It's a lot like other abstract qualities in that way. Since you can't see or feel or smell virginity or weigh it on a scale, the standards for deciding what a virgin is or isn't can be pretty arbitrary, really. Some people have felt that virginity is primarily a physical thing. Others have felt that it's really psychological or spiritual. It might be defined as having some physical elements and some psychological ones as well. Generally, the people who have gotten to make the decisions about how virginity is defined have been people in positions of power over young women's lives. Parents and older relatives, community elders, and especially religious and medical authorities have always had a lot of clout in terms of deciding what the criteria for virginity were at any given time. So all of that was just by way of, first of all, like, what body parts might we be talking about? Let's understand what those are. I just wanted us to get clear on that. So that's why we got a little bit graphic with what a hymen is, but I just think we can't talk about things that we don't understand and don't have language for. So that felt important. But the other thing is virginity and hymen are not the same thing. And if you're going to have let's say, a spiritual definition of virginity, then that might have nothing to do with the body part that we would call a hymen, which is often associated with virginity. There's a really like in-depth book about virginity in late antiquity, Jews and Christians, by Rabbi Dr. Michael Rosenberg, called Signs of Virginity, Testing Virgins and Making Men in Late Antiquity. He's interested in, there's pieces of his work that are quite interested in the making men part, which you might have been surprised by. He's not talking about men's first sexual experience. He's talking about men kind of claiming women's bodies through blood, through violence, which is really fascinating. And there's a lot of interesting things in his book. It's quite expensive, but I did put a link to it on Amazon in case anyone wants to acquire it. You can also, like, there's a lot, the internet is full of reviews of his book, which are, you can read wherever you download academic articles, and all that. He also teaches at a partner institution of ours at Hadar, so definitely feel free to find him there. The other article I wanted to bring to your attention, and here, if you click the link, you can just get access to it on academia.edu, is an article by my mother, Rabbi Dr. Ruth Langer, and it's about the Birkat Betulim. So Birkat Betulim is really interesting, and it does not really have anything to do with our parak, because a blessing over virginity, or the now lack thereof, it does not exist even in the Talmud. It is not known to either of the Talmuds. It's a very interesting kind of piece of liturgy. She goes into her best guesses about its provenance and then its use, and compares it to maybe surrounding cultures and things like that. It's a really, really wonderful and interesting article. And the reason why I just want to like recommend to people to read it in your free time is that a piece of it is sort of takes what where our Mishnah kind of leaves off, with this sense of the value and importance of virginity, which we're going to see in a second. I know it's all like, we're 20 minutes in, I'm still doing introductions, sorry. And kind of where that goes in Jewish history, that it turns into this whole ritual and prayer, which we don't see in the Mishnah, but that's kind of where it gets taken and absorbed, these similar sorts of values and ideas. And I don't know people who practice this blessing today. I think it's fallen out of practice. Maybe in ultra-Orthodox communities it's still practiced now. But anyway, so it's very, very, or her article is really interesting. I mean, it's my mom, so I'm biased, but I think it's really interesting. And I think it's sort of, if you're looking at our Mishnah and saying like, where does this go in between the Mishnah and now? I think that's a really great article for exploring. Okay, so when we're talking about proofs of virginity, that all sort of takes root in Dvarim Chaf Bet. This is a typo. Here's what happened. So so a man marries a woman, he has sex with her, and then he decides, I don't like her. And so what he decides he's going to do is he's going to make up a false claim. This is the motzi shemra. This is the defamation in the Torah. And then he's gonna go and he's gonna say, "Eta isha hazot lakachti, I married this woman, and I approached her, and I found that she was not a virgin." So in that case, what are the parents supposed to do? They're supposed to hotziu et betulei hana'ara el zivnei ha'ir hashara. They are supposed to produce evidence. So the Torah never says you must collect evidence of your daughter's or your spouse's virginity, but in the case that there is a claim against her, arguing that she is not a virgin, then you need to be able to produce it, surprisingly. So it seems like the Torah is assuming that there is some evidence of virginity that exists, that is saved, that is like at the ready for these situations. I would also say that the beginning of Ketubot and like these stories lead to a wrong assumption that many of the kalas that I've taught over the years have of like, oh, you have to have sex on your wedding night. I think this is where it comes from, and we'll see in the Mishnah. That I think that like this, and then the Mishnah's kind of interpretation or codification of this. I think that's where it comes from, but it's not right. You don't have to have sex on your wedding night, just to be clear. Okay, so then, right, so the parents say, no, here, we can prove it. We have this piece of evidence. And this language, like they produce her virginity. Right? What does that mean? What does it mean they bring out her virginity? The English translation is already an interpretation. It's not like the virginity itself. What would that be? It's evidence of her virginity that then gets interpreted to be like blood, presumably hymenal bleeding, but that's not actually clear in the Torah itself. in any event, but like what else could it be? I don't know. So anyways, if people have other ideas of what Betulei Hana'ara could be, definitely throw those in the chat or come off mute and say it. I'd love to hear if you were constructing this, what it would be. Okay, so then the father, they bring out this evidence, and the father says to the elders at Bitina Tati Leisha Leisha Vayisnaeha, he says that that's not how he says it was. I gave this man my daughter and he hates her, and now he's spreading lies about her, saying that she wasn't a virgin, but here's my evidence. Ela Betulei Viti, these are the virginities of my daughter, and they versu hasimla, right, and he spreads the cloth, so it seems like, what is this cloth? Maybe it's a cloth spattered with blood. There's still no, the Torah never says that it's blood, but okay, so somehow this simla is the evidence. And so they take the man and they flog him, or they make him suffer, and they also fine him 100 pieces of silver, and that silver goes to the father, because he was libeled or defamed, and then he has to marry the woman. He's never allowed to divorce her. He has to support her forever. But if it's true and there was no evidence of her virginity, then they stone her. And she dies because she did a bad thing. She did a shameful thing in Israel, committing fornication while under her father's authority. And thus you will sweep away evil from your midst. Okay, so that's where we get this simla, this idea that there's some sort of physical evidence, this idea that there is
you said
also a ta'anat between, that there is a way for someone, right? There's an opportunity at the end here. We have this possibility, im emet haya davar hazeh, right? There's a possibility that actually someone would make a claim and it would be true, and then that would have terrible repercussions for the woman who is not found to be a virgin. Okay, someone wanted to say something.
There was a comment in the chat as well. Panina says, my only other thought might be witnesses to her virginity, like if the color was examined by an expert before the wedding who can testify, for example.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's still right. So it's not blood, but it's still physical.
Isn't it about adultery rather than fornication?
Right. That's an interesting distinction.
You said fornication.
Yeah, I was just using this translation, but yes, I mean, it's hard to know like what the assumption here is, not like that she's masturbating so much that she broke her virginity. I guess if that's what you're understanding from fornication, here it would be like illegal sexual activity, maybe would be a way to say it, right? Adultery.
What about, do you have any ideas about the loss of virginity of Rivka when she fell from the camel?
We're gonna get there.
Oh,
We're gonna get to Rivka.
Thank you. Don't tell me that.
We're not gonna get to the camel, but we are gonna get to Rivka and to her status in general.
Quick question. Adultery would be if she had sex after she had become betrothed to the man, but just the fact that she's not a virgin doesn't, indicate that. So is the issue that she somehow shamed her father by having sex in general before marriage, or is it actual adultery, which is a problem by the Torah?
Great. Yeah, good. So this is all understood. So this whole piece here, it's complicated for exactly the reasons that you just said. I don't know who you are, this last person who spoke, but because basically what happens is if you are a single woman, which is complicated in the Torah because it's right? Least note beit of Leah, right? So it seems like, oh, she's single, she's still living with her father, but that is not how this gets interpreted. This case where she gets skila, it's interpreted that when they did Ersin, when they were betrothed, and she kind of gave her conjugal rights to her husband, she was a virgin, and then but she was still living with her father, and then by the time they did nisuin and they moved in together and they attempted to consummate the marriage, it was discovered that in that time lapse she had lost her virginity, i.e. it had sex with someone else, and that's why she gets skila, as opposed to the problem with a woman who loses her virginity before betrothal is not necessarily, she doesn't get skila for that. It could be, or what would be is that she, and we'll see this in the Mishnah, that she's like worth less, like her ketubah is worth less. So it, like her ketubah should be 100 maneh instead of 200 maneh, in that situation. So she might want to, we'll see later on when we get to the Muka'it's discussion, this will come back, but maybe she has like incentive to lie, in order to kind of like raise her value in the marriage mart. We'll get to it. But yeah, Ariel.
Ariel, I'm gonna make you a panelist so that you can unmute yourself and speak. Might take a minute.
Okay, I'm just wondering if I should keep going for a second, and then when Ariel can speak, she will. Okay. All right, let's keep going. And Ariel, when you're here, we want to hear your comment. Okay, so let's bring this now into the Mishnah. So the Mishnah starts out Betula nisi liyom haravi'i almana liyom hachamishi. A virgin is married on Wednesday, a widow on Thursday. Why is a virgin married on Wednesday? Well, why isn't everyone just married on Thursday? And so actually an interesting thing about this Mishnah, Robert Brody points it out in the new Oxford English edition. He had Ketubot has his notes, which are really great because Professor Brody is unbelievable scholar, and he points out, and he says that the Yerushalmi discusses this, that possibly this is like an interjection into the Mishnah. So really the heart of the Mishnah is a virgin gets married on Wednesday, a widow on Thursday. Why? Because if the husband of the virgin has a ta'anat betulim, he has a claim concerning his bride's virginity, he'll go early to the next day to court, i.e. on Thursday, and make his claim. And then, one second, and then, so in order to help that make sense, like a later addition into the Mishnah, but what we mean by later, like he points out, it's in all the manuscripts, but the Yerushalmi understands it to have been an addition into the Mishnah, which is just interesting. How do you understand that? That, oh, the Batei Din are sitting on Thursday. And in fact, the Gemara goes on to say, because in Bavel and Safra even say, possibly even already in Eretz Yisrael, by the time that this Mishnah was written, Batei Din are really sitting every day. Because what was the Beit Din? The Beit Din was a rabbi and his students who were sitting together in yeshiva, and they're learning every day. And any day that the yeshivot are open, people could come in and bring their claims. So, and the Gemara says, yeah, now when all the, like in places where the Beit Din sits every day, the relevance of this, the relevance of the days of the week is much more about having adequate time to prepare for the wedding than it is about the Tanat Betulim, the claims of virginity. But still, right, from the opening of Masechet Ketubot is someone's gonna have a claim against their newly wed wife's virginity, which is maybe the same assumption that is in the Torah. This is something we're not commanded to care about it, but but there's sort of this assumption that people maybe will sort of naturally care about it. And I want to look at the Bartanura in a second, but Lily Naz, you had your hand up.
I was going to introduce Ariel's question, but she's going to ask it at the end.
Okay.
So back over to Bartanura.
Okay, so on to the Bartanura. So he's gonna say, Yashkim v'yavo lebeitin. So what is this? Why do we care the beitin be sitting the next morning? Ba'ud kaso alav, while he's still mad. Like, because what could happen? Oh, if he has to wait a couple of days, Shema Yitpayes, maybe he'll be appeased. I love that, Yitpayes, appeased. That's a very good translation. In case he'll become appeased, but karer da'ato, and his thoughts will be cooled off. And he'll decide he wants to keep her. And the problem with that, right? Wouldn't we say that sounds great? Stay married to your wife. What's the problem? Right? But it's exactly what someone said above. The problem with him keeping her, if he thinks that she's not a virgin, is Shema Zin Ta'atav, is in case in that space between betrothal and marriage, nisuin, whatever we want to call nisuin, between betrothal and marriage. I hate both of those translations. And before she moved in, between the betrothal and them moving in together, she had sex with someone else, and then she's prohibited to him. That's the problem, right? When a woman cheats on her husband, she is no longer allowed to have sex with her husband. And so if he actually really thinks that she cheated on him, we really care about that. And we really want him to go do something about that and to stay motivated to go do something about that. So it seems like, right, it seemed from the outset like, oh, he's supposed to care about her virginity, but we never actually legislate him to care about her virginity. We just say, get married on this day. It's sort of strange, right? But at the end of the day, if he really thinks that she cheated on him, then he does need to go do something about that because she's prohibited to him in that situation. But you could have the whole thing could have just said, if your wife isn't a virgin, don't sleep with her anymore. You have to assume that she had sex with someone else. And instead we say, like, get married on this day of the week so that you'll still be mad. It's a very kind of roundabout way of getting to that resolution and of legislating. And it's not even, sometimes we say, oh, the Mishnah does things in roundabout ways because the Mishnah likes bringing cases, but this isn't a case, it's legislation. It's just very roundabout legislation. And so what I want to argue is that it's reflecting a certain tension of, on the one hand, like, yeah, we do want to prosecute in cases where we think she's cheated on him. And like, I think it leaves space open for the complexities of virginity. So on the one hand, it's not the case that her not bleeding when they have sex for the first time is the problem, right? The problem is if she slept with someone in between betrothal and nisuin. So I think this strange sort of roundabout legislation leaves open the opportunity for her to make all kinds of claims about why that might have been, or for him to just say, I'm not bothered. I believe that you've never had sex with someone else, and the fact that you didn't bleed doesn't tell me anything about that, right? So I think it leaves open a sort of fuzziness around virginity, where the case becomes later on in Jewish history, when we have this Birkat Betulim, and you can read my mom's whole article where it turns into this whole thing where you really do need to create evidence of virginity. Here, there's no obligation for her to create evidence of virginity. There's obligation for him to trust that she didn't sleep with anyone between betrothal and marriage. And I think those are actually, I'm trying to like sort of excavate a space between those two options. And I hope it's making a little bit of sense. Okay.
Rabbanit
Debbie.
Sarna, I hear what you're saying. I understand that. I think excuse my ignorance, but there's also the case in the Torah of Sota. I think in those days, the women were looked at as something, it hurts me like property, and as something that you needed to be, you didn't want to be embarrassed or ever looked at that you couldn't trust your wife, or
Yeah.
that there was any suspicious talk about her.
Absolutely.
So I think the best defense is a good offense. I think is possibly something that a husband would do. I think that I don't know if they wanted proof as much as they wanted to situate themselves as above any doubt. And I think that that was also played a part here.
That seems certainly to be playing a part in what's happening in the Torah, right? That there's no obligation for the family to collect evidence, but if the husband comes along, then the only way to defend yourself is to have evidence, and that's exactly what you're saying, that the best defense is a good offense.
Right. I mean, if he's jealous, if he's this, if he's that, he, you know, I was listening to the Time for Mishnah app, and there's all this, you know, Alav Haraya and Migu and all these things, but he seems to be the one who can say things, and then, you know, she has to extricate herself. But it comes from him that, you know, here's a problem, and here's the this, and here's the that.
Yeah,
Which reminded me of Sota.
absolutely. Yeah, you're
Or
totally
the
right.
Motzi Shemra. It's always the man who is, you know, casting the aspersions.
Well, partly because if the man's not a virgin, there's no problem, meaning there's no aspersions to be cast. You might want to, you know, you like in today's day, we would say like, oh, the guy who's a Motzi Shemra, he is a lunatic. Like, I want out. You know, now we would say that, but yeah, they didn't.
Right.
Yeah. Ariel.
Or that he's not trustworthy.
Right. Controlling, yeah.
So I have two questions. One is more narrow about the Mishnah, whether the listing of 2 dates for the Beit Din to meet has significance, not just meeting on Thursday, but that they also meet on Monday, and whether Monday perhaps gives the Baal more of a chance to reflect on whatever is going on and to sort of slow down before approaching the Beit Din. Is that a possibility in reading the Mishnah?
So I don't think so. Where the Gemara takes it is that we don't want people getting married on Monday because you can't have adequately prepared for your wedding on Monday. Like you didn't have enough days to like get all the food and all the decorations and all that not ready. So right, because it wouldn't be Monday, it would be to get married Sunday night, have sex that night, and then wake up for the Beit Din on Monday. So yeah, so that's the tricky piece about, right? Because it would really be, or not even Sunday night, it would really be Sunday morning in order to then, or Sunday daytime, right? And then be able to wake up for Monday to go to the Beit Din. So, but I hear what you're saying is like, oh, maybe it brings up Monday to say as an option, right? You got married on Wednesday. We're just floating that the Beit Din will sit again on Monday. I think that's a nice read, actually. It's not the way the Gemara takes it, but I think it's creative to say, just as a reminder, like the Beit Din's gonna be there. So if you want to take a beat on this, feel free. I like that.
Yeah, and then my second question, which is broader, is that in this situation and in the Motzi Shemra in general, are we really having sort of debates about, I guess, body parts and behavior, or sexual behavior, when sort of the subtext is relational issues going on, and sort of how can we keep both in perspective, even though perhaps the relational issues needs, like, you need to dig a little bit more to think about them.
For sure. I think this goes back to what Debbie was saying though, which is that like relational issues are hard to bring evidence about. So when you transpose a relational issue into something physical, you can like force the, right? This is what happens in Motzi Shemra. It's clearly an emotional thing, but you can force the emotional thing like back into its box with something physical. And that like courts kind of have an easier time thinking about and adjudicating with physical stuff. And honestly, that's like a downside of courts, right? Like in the, the heavenly court, that hopefully, it would be judged based on relational things. But it sort of makes sense given human limitations, I think, at least. Okay, let's keep going a little bit. I'm really excited to talk about the Muka'etz, because I think the Muka'etz is an opportunity to explore the construct of virginity. Okay, so here we just need to look at these kind of a little bit, 3 mishnayot. So Ketubot 1-2 just lays out there's a financial distinction between a betulah and a non-betulah. So betulah, Ketubata matayim, almana moneh. So a virgin, her marriage contract is 200 dinar. A widow, her marriage contract is 100 dinar. I just want to point out, like, kind of practically speaking here. So this is still the case, meaning when you go to a wedding, and they read the ketubah out loud, like some people are going to be described as betul tada, some people are going to be described as, if they're converts, gior tada, or whatever. Widows get different status, all kinds of different things. Nowadays, people have sometimes chosen against that, so they'll just have it just say the bride, like kaltada, as an equivalent of chatan dinan, right, as an equivalent of the groom who gets described.
What about a divorced woman?
Yeah, so her divorce status would typically appear in her ketubah, but it doesn't have to. So nowadays people use all kinds of different words, but it would. So the other thing though about the monetary status is that typically any woman who was born halachically Jewish, I'm trying to be really careful with my language here, a woman who was born halachically Jewish, who has not previously been married, her ketubah says 200 dinar, regardless of her hymen status, and in today's world, typically regardless of whether she has had sex. Typically, rabbis are not asking those questions. And so we do always recommend that you be straightforward with the person you're marrying about your sexual history. That's a good practice. But nowadays, almost everyone would feel comfortable writing betul tada on a ketubah, regardless of the woman's sexual history, so long as she has never been married, divorced, taken hostage, unfortunately, is a relevant category again. Yeah, so that's just wanted to sort of like flag that as a sort of, I don't know, practical piece of this that people might care about in their own lives, and there are options. So if you're someone who really doesn't want a big document hanging in your living room that describes you as a virgin, you don't have to. Okay. So that's but just to start out, right? So we have different monetary values on the marriage market for a virgin versus, let's say, an almanah, etc. That's all that stuff gets spelled out in the ellipsis here. And then we have some interesting cases. So we have gadol sheba al haktana. So we have an adult man who, we're just gonna, there's no neutral way to say it, right? The English here is just, an adult man who engaged in intercourse with a minor girl, but we would call that rape. And a minor boy who engages in intercourse with an adult woman, we would probably also call that rape, except that those people could both be, I mean, this is all like horrible to think about, but like those people could both be not like 8.5 years old, let's say, chas v'shalom, and then it would be considered an adult woman because women become sexually adults at 3 years old in a day, and a minor boy because boys become sexually adults at 9 years old in a day. Just flagging that. But okay, anyways, moving on. And then we get to our Muka'etz. And then we also have a woman who had her hymen ruptured by wood. But what that's a stand-in for is a woman who does not have a hymen, but is a virgin, right? And that's what I'm saying. We'll see in a second, but like that language of a virgin is complicated because virginity is this made-up construct, right? So she's lost her hymen, but she has never had sex. Lost her hymen. She's whatever. There's no visible hymen, and she has never had sex, and they're imagining she fell on something and it broke it. She fell out of a tree. She got injured. She rode her horse too fast. Whatever. A million options for how someone's hymen could stretch, and therefore would not bleed during sex, even if it was the first time that they had penetrative sex. So all of those people, the adult man who rapes a minor girl, a minor boy who has sex with an adult woman, or a mukat, according to Rebbe Meir, Ketubatan Matayim, they are considered virgins for the purposes of the ketubah. And the Chachamim say, no, mukat ketubatan maneh. They say, no, the mukat virginity is determined by not whether you've had sex with another person or not, by just the existence of your hymen. The fact that your hymen is such that you will bleed on the first time you have sex, right? There's like no good like way to say it. But the rabbis say that our mukat, her ketubah is a maneh. And what that debate between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim is, I think that's really important in terms of getting our hands around the rabbinic concept of virginity. So the rabbis want to say it's all about this physical manifestation, and Rabbi Meir wants to say it's all about whether you've had sex or not. And then we're going to see about her claim. So what happens regardless of how you hold between what her ketubah ought to be, okay? Now we skipped a bunch of mishnayot, by the way. We're now in 1:7. She's gonna say, she makes a claim. He says, you didn't bleed, you're not a virgin. She says, muka eitz ani. I didn't bleed. I am muka eitz. I didn't bleed because something stretched my hymen earlier. I was a very, I don't know, intense, I'm just like making this up. Like I was an intense horseback rider, whatever it is. And he says, no, and this is horrible language. Drusat ishat, you have been, you weren't trampled, you weren't injured by a tree, you were injured by a man, you were trampled by a man. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say she's believed. This is one of those 4 cases. And Rabbi Yeshua says, Lomi piha anu chayim. We do not live according to her words. Ella harezo b'chazkat drusat ish, says Rabbi Yeshua. Rather, she is assumed to have been trampled by a man ad shetavira ayali dvareha, until she can bring some sort of proof supporting her statement that her hymen was ruptured by wood, that she is mukat eitz. Okay, so even in the world where even in Rabbi Meir's world, I think you can still make sense of this Mishnah, because if she doesn't know from the outset that she's mukat eitz, she thinks maybe she just doesn't know. How would she know? Like, unless something happened, she was, like, I don't know, like found herself with a piece of wood up her vagina or something very painful sounding like that. Like she could be in the status of mukat eitz, someone whose hymen isn't going to bleed when they have sex for the first time and not even know it. And then he says, oh, you had sex with someone between the betrothal and the marriage and the nisuin and the marriage. You're a zonah, like we should take you out and give you skila. She could say, no, that's not it. I've never had sex with a man. I just didn't bleed. And right, so even in the world of Rabbi Meir, where a mukat eitz is still considered a virgin, if they don't agree that she's a mukat eitz, you could still have an argument about it with very high levels of severity and repercussions. Okay. So this Tosafta is just, oh yeah, Leah, go ahead.
Just wanted to check that you saw Miriam's comment in the chat.
I did not.
Miriam asks, are you conflating penetrative sex and yichud in terms of minors, or does the language specify one or the other?
We're talking about penetrative sex exclusively. Yeah. Yichud is about like an assumption that maybe that would have happened, but here we're talking about penetrative sex and the repercussions of it. So the rabbinic understanding is that if someone, God forbid, has sex with a girl under 3 years old, her hymen will regrow after that time. So there's their concept of virginity is like sex with a girl under 3 doesn't count, which is horrible. And it's not like they're encouraging it either. They're just saying it doesn't like doesn't affect her for the rest of her life. Like, or if like this girl who has no agency, she's under 3 years old, like someone like does something horrible to her, it's maybe right, there's like a gentle perspective on it, which is what I'm always looking for, of course, which is like we don't want that to affect her for the rest of her life. So by the time she's 3, maybe she can fight someone off or something, but before that, when she has like really no agency, we don't want something like that to affect her and her marriage prospects for the rest of her life. So we understand that her hymen regrows, or she can resume the status of a virgin at that point. So again, you know, like we wouldn't necessarily like hymens don't regrow, they don't regrow, like that's not the physical like thing of it, but virginity is a construct, and so they've constructed it in a way that in a certain sense, or like in a certain perspective at least, is protective of these very little girls who they're imagining being raped. Yeah, it's very scary, extremely scary, and horrible. So Sefta is just where we see those like what is a female minor, what is a male minor. So I just wanted to bring that for you. Okay, we have 4 minutes, so we're not going to look at this Breshit Rabbah about Rivka, but it is really interesting. It points out like a few, basically the question of the Midrash in Breshit Rabbah is, it describes Rivka as she's very beautiful, Betula v'ish lo yida'ah, she's virgin and no man had ever had sex with her. So what does that mean? Isn't virginity and no man had been intimate with her, aren't those the same thing? So then it goes into that redundancy, and what could the differences between that be? So that's this translation is from Sephora, and it's not perfect, so I recommend reading in the Hebrew. I do just want to leave you with some words from Safrai on this. Safrai, they wrote Mishnah Eretz Yisrael. It's a wonderful, phenomenal commentary on the Mishnah. The fact that it is on Sefaria, that's relatively recent, and it is like just such a gift to the Jews, as with all things Sefaria. It brings like historical and critical perspectives, and it's just magnificent. This translation was written quickly by me, so it's only on there in Hebrew. It does not really exist in translation yet. But if that's something that's accessible to you and you want to like read more as you're learning Mishnah Eretz Yisrael, 10 out of 10 recommend. Okay, so they just point out mukat ha'itz niskaret rabot b'halacha. This category of mukat ha'itz is mentioned a lot in halachic literature. Vayachas eleha hu salchani v'ampati b'miuchad, and the orientation towards her is particularly apologetic and pathetic. They say niftach b'kach shemukat ha'itz inana niskaret b'mikra. The Torah does not have a concept of mukat ha'itz, of this woman who doesn't have physical manifestations of her virginity, i.e. it could be, right, that actually what that reflects on is that the Torah has a totally different idea of what virginity even is. Could be that for the Torah, virginity is exclusively physical, for example, and that the rabbis actually are saying, no, virginity is about have you had sex or not, as a person with agency, let's say a woman, as a woman with agency, i.e. over the age of 3 years old. The idea that a girl who's 3 years old and one day has agency is obviously very difficult. But anyways, let's go with it for a second. And so if you have not had, so expanding the potential idea of even what virginity is. Like mukat eitz expands the possibility that virginity is really about like mukat eitz versus drusat ish, right? It's about like virginity is about have you had sex with a man or not about your physical manifestation on your body and having a hymen. Everyone has a hymen. Okay. But basically, right, so they're very empathetic towards her. So and they spell out the situation. She claims that she did not sin, that she didn't do anything wrong. And she's in a situation where people are not believing her. But it's complicated. This goes to Debbie's migos because if she wanted to say, she could, like, what are, right, in halacha we always want to ask ourselves what are all the different claims this person could make, and that's how we evaluate whether we believe a person's claim, particularly if they don't have other evidence. So that's essentially the process called amigo. So if someone says she's a mukat eitz, what are the other things she could have said? She could have said, yes, I did have sex, or I was raped, or whatever it is, before the betrothal. So correct, I have had sex, I am not a virgin, but it was all before we were involved, so I'm not an adulteress. I'm just not what I claim to be. The problem is, right, if in a perfect world of amigo, you would want like that to be a way better claim than a mukat eitz, and it's not a better claim, right? Because if she'd had sex before, then her ketubah value should have been 100 instead of 200. So that's the tricky thing about that claim or about that migo, is that it doesn't fully, like, she's incentivized to claim that she's a mukat eitz. On the other hand, like, some people really are mukat eitz and they can't bring evidence to it. Like Rabbi Yeshua demands evidence, but that's clearly not, I mean, just anyone thinking about it knows that that's clearly quite difficult standard, or maybe even an impossible for the most part standard. Unless someone like literally watched her like fall in a certain way as a child or something like that, like maybe that's how that would be possible. So I just like this idea that Safrai drawing out of, like, and I know my time is up, that that this is a really sad situation for this woman, and the rabbis carving out even this category of mukat eitz, which does not appear in the Torah, I think is a real, and we see it kind of coming to be developed through that midrash about Rivka, which is why I think that's so interesting. Is important because it expands a concept of virginity in an interesting way, and then two, it leaves open a way out for these women who don't bleed the first time they have penetrative sex. But the problem is, right, and that's what leads to the debate between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer versus Rabbi Yeshua, is that the migo doesn't work perfectly. Women would be very incentivized to say that they're mukat eitz, because then they're still a virgin even though they can't prove it. So that's the kind of the challenge that they bring out here. And then, right, Debbie mentioned before Sota. So the challenge is, like, do we trust her? So they bring in this this third position, right? So we believe her that she's a mukat eitz. We don't believe her without proof. And there's a third position in the Yerushalmi, a middle position, which says she doesn't lose her ketubah, but they actually have to get divorced in case she did cheat on him. And if she cheated on him, then they're not allowed to sleep together again. So it's like a middle path, but it's also kind of horrible. And it shows suspicion. But to get back to Ariel's point about there's like a piece of this that's relational. The minute she has to make a claim, I'm a mukat eitz, to like a beit din, there's something wrong here anyways. And maybe the idea that like you have to pay up your ketubah and you can't stay together, right? Safrai say, oh, it's a middle path between the two extremes. But once you bring in Ariel's consideration, I actually start to wonder whether there's something very gentle about this suggestion of pay up her full ketubah and end the marriage, because if you're making this type of claim, then you shouldn't be in a marriage like this. Okay, I think we're gonna stop there. The Mishnah about like the different practices in that space. We're very interested. That space between betrothal and marriage is like lurking behind this whole parak, and it comes to the fore in Mishnah 5, when we have a difference in practice described between Yudah and Galil, and that difference in practice implicates whether you can make a tanat between or not. Anyways, I brought you the barking around that. Super interesting. And we're just gonna stop here because my time is up, and we will reconvene next week and talk about chapter 2. Thanks, everyone.
Wow, thank you, Rabbanit Sarna. What an amazing start to this next adventure in Masechet Ketubot. Thank you to you and to all of our learning community for being here, being part of the community, and of course, your questions and comments. We will be seeing you here next week. So happy learning over this next week.